Take note. I'm Justin Rempel, and this video is all about the process and the art of taking notes. So what do I mean when I'm talking about taking notes? Taking notes is a process that we do ourselves as learners, as people who are absorbing information, and it's for our own benefit. We write down short points that summarize the information. The key here is that we're looking for the points that are the most important, the most essential pieces. We're not adding in anything that's extraneous, extra detail. This is a really important and valuable skill. And because it's a skill, it takes practice to learn how to do and to get good at. Why should I bother taking notes? Why is this a useful skill for me as a learner? Well, notes are really beneficial in a number of ways. One key thing is organization. When I'm taking notes, I get to organize the structure of the information. So I'm taking it from a source. Usually it's a nonfiction source, but it might be a fiction source. I might be taking notes on a story and figuring out key points. And I'm structuring that information into an order that makes sense for me, my learning, and my needs, my purpose. What assignment or project am I working on that's going to kind of dictate and inform how I'm structuring and organizing my notes. Note taking is helpful in terms of simplification. I'm sort of weeding out all of the extras and I'm just boiling it down to its core, its essence. So when I go back and look at it, I'm just going to see the main ideas in front of me. Note taking is really helpful for memory retention. You remember things better if you take notes on them. This is scientifically proven. And so this is really helpful for learning because generally speaking, we want to remember the things that we're reading and studying. It's also helpful for comprehension. If I take notes, I'm going to have a deeper understanding of the information because I've involved myself in the process. I've taken some kind of action to record the information myself, my own way, on my own terms. It's really helpful to note take for future reference because I can come back a day later, a week later, years later to the notes that I've taken, and I don't have to go through the original source all over again and identify the key points and the main information. I've already done that work. So now I can go back to my notes and I can see a clearly organized structure that tells me the most important information. It saves a lot of time down the road. What kinds of things should I write down if I'm taking notes? The main idea is that we're focusing on the main ideas. We're reading a story or a piece of information, and we're trying to identify the key concepts and just write those down. It takes practice to identify key concepts, to do good note taking. Some tips I can give you are you're looking for repeated ideas, especially if you're listening to an audio recording or a live speaker. Things that are coming up over and over again, that's probably a main idea you should write down. But you can read and notice a main idea that's repeated as well. If you're reading a text, you might want to look out for keywords that are bolded or italicized. Those are probably good terms to note and remember. Pay attention not just to the words, but to their definitions. That could be a main idea. Lists of key points. If you come across lists in your text, that might be a good thing to write down and record because lists are very handy ways of organizing information in our notes and in our minds and our memories. Other text features besides keywords or lists of key points might be titles. Pay attention to those. Book titles, chapter titles, section titles, headers, table of contents might be a good place to start. You can look and see how the original author organized their information. That might give you some ideas of the main ideas or points to write down. Pay attention to the first and last sentences in paragraphs or chapters or sections of a text. These are often topic sentences that contain the main ideas. Sometimes texts come with summaries or abstracts already available. So these are places where some of this work has been done for you. A text has been boiled down to just a short version of the main ideas. That's a really good place to jump in. And this isn't cheating. As we're figuring out ways to absorb information, we're looking for these handy shortcuts, but we're wanting to do the work and the learning ourselves. So I really recommend, say, making your own notes as opposed to just grabbing someone else's summary or list. And the reason I say that is because it's better for your own memory retention, and it's better for your own understanding and comprehension if you do that work yourself. It'll actually stick better in your brain. How should I take notes? Well, one factor in this is the source format. It's going to change depending on how you're receiving the information. For example, if you're listening to a live speaker and you're trying to follow along and take notes, this is the trickiest form because a speaker talks at their own pace, right? And people bring all sorts of challenges into that, especially if they're not a good speaker. They speak too fast or too slowly, they mumble, they don't enunciate well. If you need to, raise your hand and ask a question. That's a good way to pause or to clarify some information as you're trying to identify the key points of a live speaker. More and more, though, what we are finding is that when we do have live speakers, there's often audio recordings that are taking place as well. So you can go back, you can go online, you can find that presentation later, and you can listen back to it if you need to take some more notes. If you're listening to any kind of audio recording, it's much easier to take notes. You can pause, you can rewind, go back, you can replay that audio. Same with watching a video, right? Videos are great for note taking because you can always pause, go back, replay if you need to. And that's very helpful for writing down these ideas, especially as a starting note taker who's figuring out the process. You're not going to be very efficient or fluid right off the hop, most likely. And so you're going to want to pause, rewind, go back, re-listen, rewatch as you're working on these skills, as you're practicing and getting better. If you're just reading a text in a physical form, like a book or magazine or online on a screen, these are great because they've got all those text features built in, titles and bolded words and lists and charts. So pay attention to those, reread if you need to, highlight if you need to. Those physical texts or digital texts are really great for note taking. How should I take notes? This process also can change quite a bit depending on your format that you choose to take notes in. So for example, you might choose to type up your notes. More and more people are doing this. The real pro or benefit of that form of note taking is that it's quick. So it's much easier to keep up, especially if you're listening to someone talking or you're watching a video. You can type quite quickly while you're listening. However, it's not as good for memory retention and comprehension as physical writing because you're not quite as involved in a physical act of making the words. You're just hitting buttons. So that's kind of the con or the downside. Writing is great. You get higher memory retention because you're physically writing out the words, and you get very good comprehension. The downside, of course, is that it's slower. It's just not as fast as typing, so it's harder to keep up. Some people are faster writers than others, and you can definitely improve your speed, but there's only so much you can do about that, right? Of course, you can use a hybrid model. You can do both. Some people like to type up their original set of notes, then go back and kind of refine, revise their notes. You can do drafts of notes, just like you do with any other form of writing. And the second time around, they'll physically write it out with a pen or pencil on paper. Some people like to do repetition. So they'll write it out once, they'll write it out twice, they'll maybe even write it out 3 times, and every time they're revising, working on boiling the notes down to just the key ideas that they need. Repetition is really good for memory retention and comprehension because you're doing something more than once. So it's obviously more work, it takes more time, but it's great for understanding. How should I take notes? Well, there's lots of different strategies that you can use in terms of what these notes actually look like. So generally speaking, we're going to be working in point form, right? We want short points. You don't need to worry about perfect sentences and paragraphs because we're not writing an essay. It's not a form that requires that. We're just writing in brief phrases and points. When you're working in point form, you might want to have points and then subpoints that are slightly indented. This kind of shows the hierarchy or classification of information, what's maybe more of a main point and what's a supporting point or a secondary point. Same thing if you're making an outline, just like you would if you're planning for a paper or an essay. You can make an outline of notes, and that starts to categorize the information into main points and ideas and subpoints or supporting points. You can always make charts and tables to organize your information, especially if you're working in clear categories that you've defined, where some information can go in this column, some information can go in this column, some information can go in that column. But then you need to do some work up front, categorizing your information into different groupings. You can make mind maps or flow charts. These are different kind of designs on the page, different layouts to organize information. And different strategies work better for different people. So try a few different things. You might have some handouts from a teacher with some of these strategies like mind maps or flowcharts on them, where those things are already pre-built. But once you learn the strategies, you can easily make your own on a scrap sheet of paper or on your computer screen, no problem. Sometimes people use highlighting for note taking. This is not quite the same thing as writing it out yourself or typing it up yourself. It's just making a mark on the physical page or on the digital page to show what text is important. It's a really handy tool for identifying important text. If you're reading a physical text, you can have a highlighter marker where you can highlight important sections. Of course, that doesn't erase well. It's hard to undo that. So try not to make mistakes. Digital text, more and more programs are coming built in with highlighter tools ready to go. So you can highlight and you can start color coding if you want to highlight in different colors, right? A pro of highlighting, it's very easy to return to the text later and zone in on the key text. Oh yeah, I don't need to read all the unhighlighted stuff. I'm just going to focus on the stuff that I highlighted before because I know what's important. Of course, the downside of that is if you miss something on the first go round, you're probably not going to go back and catch it and read it the second go round. A con or a downside of highlighting is it's not going to have as high memory retention as if you write out your own version. People use all kinds of color coding systems for note taking. To do color coding, you're going to have different colors for different categories, and that means you need to do a little bit of extra work up front identifying different categories of information. This could be just your own personal categories for your own needs, how you're structuring your writing, your paper, whatever, or it could be the categories already found in the text. So you might be researching a problem and you want 2 categories of causes and solutions, or you're doing a paper on mental health and you're looking at 3 different issues. So one color is for anxiety, one's for depression, one's for OCD. You're trying to write a paper, so you just come up with 3 points for your paper. Point 1, 2, 3. Okay, blues for point 1, reds for point 2, yellows for point 3. Okay, this is your own system that you're coming up with. So it's a good idea to write down a legend somewhere. What do the colors stand for? In case you ever forget, you can go back and check. What did red mean again? Oh yeah, red was for point 2. Yeah, and you're assigning the colors to each category arbitrarily. It's your decision what color means what. Sometimes people think of intuitive things. Well, obviously green should go with point number 3 because that's about plants, and green is a common plant color. So if there's a system that makes sense to you, that's helpful as well. But these colors are used to organize information. You can do this if you're highlighting, right? You can use different colors of highlighter. You can use post-it notes, write notes on different colors of post-it notes because they come in all colors. The danger with post-it notes is they can get disorganized very quickly, but some people like to work that way. Some people thrive in that chaos. You can use different color tabs, especially if you're working in a binder, to put information into different sections. You can use color coding in all sorts of wonderful and fun ways. And it looks great too. It's lots of fun. The last thing I'm going to talk about is abbreviations, and abbreviations or shorthand is a great idea when you're taking notes, because often when you're taking notes, you're concerned about speed. You're trying to keep up with the information, whether you're listening or reading, and you don't want to spend a bunch of time pausing and just writing your notes. So if you want to take notes quickly, write in short point form, but also use shorthand if you need to. So those could be abbreviations that exist, or just shortened down words. If there's a word that's really long, write a short version. You can use official abbreviations that actually exist and are in common usage, or you can just come up with your own invention and your own system that works for you, especially if it's a long word that you're reading a lot and you just don't want to write it out every time. Come up with your own shorthand. As long as you know what it means, okay? So either you remember, or better yet, you write it down somewhere so you know, okay, every time I write this letter, it's going to stand for this really long word. So I've provided some examples on the screen here. You can see some examples of abbreviations or shortened words that you might use if you're note-taking. Abbreviations, really good idea. Makes your note taking quicker and more efficient.